like teeth from your broken lips. You let me have it with a gentle voice, a whispering. I clenched my stomach and the planet started shimmering. You took your last strike and flicked away the cigarette. You touched my hand and in my heart I knew that it was for good. I took a chance on the wild side for what it's worth. You kept my heart, yeah, you kept it, and I knew that you should. I've learned my part and I once thought that I should let you know. You're so good, you want me to. You're so good, baby, I'm obvious. You're so
Oh, great. Well, I really enjoyed what you had to say tonight about Ebola, and I just had a few questions. I know that economic and political factors got brought up, and there's been some discussion from a pharmacologist who writes for Forbes. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is David Kroll, and he said that the media, Associated Press specifically, and a lot of other top media sources discussed not bringing up a lot of Ebola cases unless there's actually been a blood test done. So any suspicious cases, they're no longer reporting on. Do you think that this is to prevent fear out in the United States, or do you think there's reasoning behind that?
I think potentially it's to try to prevent fear. I think we're trying to make sure that we get accurate information out, and because we know that the disease is very difficult to spread, I think it makes sense that we want to not alarm people before it's necessary, and so it does seem reasonable to me.
Okay, and then also discussing travel bans. I know that was brought up at one point. Why do you think they decided to not ban travel from highly infected areas?
I think for the same reason. I think because we know from a scientific perspective that the disease is very hard to spread, and so if someone is not symptomatic, they're not likely to spread the disease. So I think it does make sense that people are informed about what the symptoms are, but otherwise that we don't need to worry about banning travel.
That was awesome. You know, he's only 19 years old and he's putting out that kind of material. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I'd like to go on to our next subject, bring Michael up, our guest. Michael, would you like to come up here? Our second Michael. So Michael's the chairman of the board. Good, Michael.
Good to see you.
Good. And he's the chairman of the board at FVTV, and very knowledgeable in just the arena of like the upper echelon, the Illuminati and so forth, and just kind of the behind the scenes of, what would you call it?
Well, maybe get to what I want to talk about is, as a young man, I was out of college and I was trying to figure out how the world works. And I knew from high school, I actually read the story of the Rothschilds. So I knew that here were this family, great amount of wealth, and I saw them that they were financing both sides of wars. They had the power to bring or take kingdoms and destroy them. And I saw that they had quite a bit of influence. So I knew that. I knew that was happening back in the 1800s. The question is, was it happening still today? So, and when I said today, this is back in the 1970s when I was investigating this. So what happened then is, and you might remember when President Carter got elected president, there was a lot of interest in the fact that Carter, out of something like 22 appointments, 19 or so of them belonged to an organization known as the Trilateral Commission. And a lot of people were wondering, okay, here are these wealthy people belonging to some international group. The Trilateral Commission basically is a secret group that was basically uniting European, Japanese, and American interests. And so the question was, you know, how influential was that, and was this significant? So I started digging into this. My fundamental question was, as I looked through history, I was trying to figure out, was history just a series of random events, or was there a pattern? And when you go and you start studying something like the Bolshevik Revolution, which brought down and created the original Soviet Union, what we see is an interesting interlock of organization that you see it in, go back to Karl Marx's writing, he's talked about the downtrodden rising up and overcoming the masses, and, but it never ever worked that way. It was always from the top down. But you look at the organization, you start with Jacob Schiff giving $20 million to Trotsky, which was admitted by his family. Trotsky takes that, the Warburg family arranges the SEAL train going through Germany. You see money coming out of Scandinavian countries, and you look at all these funds were funneling in to bringing down the Soviet Union, or bringing down Russia at the time. So you see this, these kinds of events in history, and you see it wasn't just this spontaneous uprising in the Soviet Union, or former Soviet Union. So you start asking the question was, okay, I see that there had to be, in order for an event like this to have come about, there had to be some central managerial directing body that was coordinating all of this. And that became my interest. I was trying to figure out, okay, I think there's somebody controlling things. If they are, who are they? And not only who are they, what are they doing? And probably more important, I think that, and I'm not sure I have the complete answer, is why are they doing this? I have some speculation about that. So one of the things that I wanted to do is, in 1980, I happened to meet a gentleman by the name of Norman Dodd, and he's actually fairly well known, and I wanted to basically talk a little bit about him and what his journey was.
Yeah. Can we pull that up on the screen, please?
So what happened was I came in contact because, as I said, I was always trying to find out, in those days, people were using the term they. They were doing this or they were doing that, and nobody really had an answer as to actually who they were. And you hear terms like the cabal, the Illuminati, and a number of things that people use today to try to figure out who are they, who is basically behind this. Well, I had heard through my contacts that this Norman Dodd had some idea as to what he had concluded. And I ran into somebody in Portland who was a gentleman by the name of Ron Sunseri, who I've lost track of, and if anybody out there knows Ron.
What was his last name?
Ron Sunseri, S-U-N-S-E-R-I. Okay. He was a representative in the House of Representatives in the state of Oregon. Later, he was also worked in had a missionary position. And, but I've lost track of him. But what I did is, in 1980, Norman Dodd came to Portland. I had an opportunity to meet with him. And I started working with Ron, and I transcribed. I have a thick notebook, it's about 3 inches thick, of transcripts, of tapes. And some were lectures, some were private lectures, and there are private discussions, and some were public lectures. Norman Dodd became famous because in 1953, a committee of the U.S. Congress was investigating the tax-exempt foundations to determine if the conduct of their work and their grant-making, if they were doing anything which could be considered un-American. And so Norman Dodd was appointed the research director. There was actually the counsel to this committee that didn't want to come to Washington, so he brought Norman in. And Norman basically knew the story in advance. He kind of knew what was going on, and so they brought him in. And he started doing the research, and also he was a good researcher. He also brought in he had some contacts, so he brought in one of what he thought was a really good intelligence officer. And actually, when they brought that intelligence officer, that sent up some red flags. People knew that he was getting into some heavy things. But maybe I should go and give you his background. Here was a gentleman who was born in 1899, educated at Andover, a private school in the East, graduated from Yale and went into the world of finance, and found himself in the 1920s working at Bankers Trust, which was one of the Morgan banks. And he became somewhat critical of how they were doing some of their investments. Basically, the gist of it was, if somebody invested $1 and they found that the dollar was worth $10, he thought their responsibility was to maintain that $10. But the bank thought, well, we just need to make sure they get their original dollar back. So he had some questions about how they were managing, and few weeks after this presentation, he gets a call. And he's called into a vice president's office who was in charge of all the trust funds that were held by that bank. And in on his heels came Henry Morgenthau Sr. Henry Morgenthau's son was later Secretary of Treasury.
Was that J.P. Morgan?
No, Morgenthau.
Morgan.
Yeah, and then Henry Morgenthau Jr. Basically was under Roosevelt, was the Secretary of Treasury.
Oh.
So this individual comes into this office and says, "Sir, as you know, my family has 7 trust funds in this bank." And by the way, this is September 1929. He says, "As you know, my family has 7 trust funds in this bank. As you know, I have the power to see how those funds are to be directed, and I'd like at this time to see that I'd like to direct these funds as I see fit." And it was agreed that he had that responsibility. And he said, "What I would like you to do is take all of these trust funds that are held by my family and liquidated all of the stocks and invest in U.S. government bonds." And later he said, "And I can assure you I do not wish you to touch that investment until I instruct otherwise. And I can assure you I will not do so for at least 15 years. And Norman, of course, realized he was there because it was his job to carry out these transactions as a junior officer of this bank. Well, as we know, a few weeks later, the
stock market crash.
The stock market came down, and it was very interesting listening to somebody talk about it from somebody who was there, and he talked about people that he looked up to as like father figures. Remember, he's 30 years old at the time, and he's looking up to these people, and he said, there were suicides, people were just breaking down. The management basically went into disarray. They didn't know what happened. And amidst all this turmoil, they came to him and they said, "Norman, what should we do?" And of course, he's thinking to himself, "I have no idea what to do." But he said, "I did manage to tell them what was on my mind." And he said, "Gentlemen, you can take this as proof that there's certain things about banking which you know nothing about, and if I were you, I would go and figure out what that is. And then once you learn that, act upon it." And he turned and he left. Well, a couple weeks later, they call him back and they said, "Norman, you go find out." So that led him on to this path to try to figure out what led to this collapse. How was it? And he knew basically he had to figure out what did Henry Morgenthau Sr. know, and he said he couldn't just go ask him. So that led him into this, this whole journey of really uncovering and trying to understand wealth. And you have to realize his background, and he went from the bank. Later, what happened was he did his investigation, came back 2 years later, and made a statement to the bank. And he said, "Gentlemen, here's what we basically need to do." And what the results were, they said to him, "Norman, what you're telling us is we need to return to sound banking." And he said, they said actually to Norman, they said, "Norman, you will never see sound banking again in the United States."
What did they mean by sound banking?
I can tell you fundamentally, one of the principles, of course, was stewardship and what we might call sound trusteeship of trust funds. But in addition to that, we get into the fractional reserve banking system, which turns out to be a destructive process, which has led to a number of things, as well as monetizing of debt. And when I say monetizing of debt, what happened was, and he was there at Bankers Trust during those days, when the government started borrowing funds. So let's say in those days it costs $70 million or something to run the bank. Okay? Well, the income that started coming through from all of the debt produced by the new U.S. government, it wasn't that great back then, but it was something like $700 million. So, which basically that paid for all of their operating expenses, and so the interesting statement that the bankers made was, and I've never forgot this statement, it was, "Norman, the reason we cannot go back to sound banking is because of the institutionalizing of conflicts of interest that have been so entangled in this web from politics and finance that we can never untangle them." And so, anyway, he left, and ultimately he went on his career and actually maintained his world in the world of finance, became an investment advisor and did some work like that. So then we get into 1953. Here's an individual who was a philosopher, a researcher. He gave 1 year to a college that was starting up part of his library. And part of his library was 12,000 books. So we're talking about, this is a guy that had done quite a bit of research and knew quite a bit of people. So we get into to this investigation, and a number of things happen. Now, when I start talking about this investigation, it's the large tax-exempt foundations. And in those days, and we look at, they look at something like 7,000 tax-exempt foundations that existed. They narrowed it down to about 12 that comprised maybe 80-90% of the wealth that was being held in these foundations. And the question then of the U.S. Congress was, in their grant-making capacity and the use of this wealth, what was the effect that it was having on the United States, and could that, any of that, in those days, in that language was, could any of that be considered un-American? Well, so what happened is they identified these 12 foundations. We're talking about the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Guggenheim Foundation, et cetera, these large foundations. Well, he first goes to the Ford Foundation. And remember, Henry Ford had, with his wealth, had created a foundation, which I can tell you what the Ford Foundation was later doing, I don't think Henry Ford would have been supportive of. So he comes to Rowan Gaither, who was then the head of this foundation. He meets in his office, and he said, Norman, I thought perhaps off the record you might tell us what the purpose of the U.S. Congress is in investigating these foundations. And before he could finish, he said, I think maybe you should know that those of us here at the policymaking level of the Ford Foundation have learned to operate, many of us had experience with the OSS during World War II and also the European Economic Association, and we learned to operate under certain directives which emanate from the White House. Would you like to know the substance of those directives? And he said, yes. And he made this statement. This is one of the things that he's well known for, as his statement, and that was, the substance of our grant-making capacity is to create grants such that we can so alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. And at that time, Norman said he was about ready to fall off his chair, but he said, well, in light of that, many of your grants now make sense. I can see what you've been doing, and it makes sense. And you are legally entitled to do that. But I don't think that you are entitled to withhold this from the American public to whom you're beholden for your tax-exempt status. Why don't you just tell them what you told us? And he said, of course, we'd never do that. And he said, well, you've answered the question that basically what we're doing here with the United States Congress is we're now trying to investigate to find out what you have just told me. And so they began through this journey. Now, the second most interesting foundation that they went to was the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And you think about that name, and it's kind of interesting because this foundation was founded by the wealth created by the Carnegie family. And the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace was formed in 1906. And what happened was he goes to the board, and the board said, well, in 1948, with the Senate ratification of the UN treaty, we now have deemed our mission to be complete, so we turned a lot of our old historical records have been put in a warehouse in New York, and if you want, you can go look through our minute books. We'll give you a couple weeks if you spare a member of your staff. And Norm was looking at me thinking, oh, these guys are a little bit crazy, and realized that these are fairly young people, hadn't been with the organization long. Some of you might remember Alger Hiss, who was found to be a communist and was later put in prison. Alger Hiss formerly ran the UN, actually was behind the UN, and was also formerly ran the Carnegie Endowment for National Peace. So he was out, so he was looking at these people and realized they probably have no idea what's in those minute books. Well, Norman had this member of his staff that was not too sympathetic to this whole investigation. She was a lawyer in Washington, D.C., was put on the staff to make sure that in the conduct of this investigation, they didn't violate any of the laws of Congress. So, and she would say things like, why would you want to investigate these tax-exempt foundations? They do so much good. So he says, okay, Catherine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to block out, you can't possibly read 50 years worth of minutes, but what I'm going to do is block out certain periods of time that I want you to investigate. And gave her a dictaphone. Back in the old days, they had a dictaphone, these wires, belts, and she would go in and just read in certain segments of time. So here's this organization known as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And they began in their board meetings discussing a very specific research question. And that question was this: is there any means more effective than war, assuming you wish to affect the lives of an entire nation? And they start discussing this in a very academic way throughout this first year. At the end of the first year, they answer the question. They conclude, no, war is the most effective means, assuming you wish to alter the lives of a given people. Again, this is the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, note that word. So then they ask the question, okay, how do we get the United States involved in a war? Well, they discuss that, and they ultimately determine, well, we need to control the diplomatic machinery of the United States. And then the question was, well, how do we do that? And they ultimately determined, well, in order to do that, we need to control the State Department. And that fit in with this, with some other investigations that this committee did, and they learned of an organization known as the American Council for a Learned Society. And that organization was set up by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and it became a screening agency. So anybody that would want to go into the State Department would basically be screened by this organization. So through time, then they would basically control it. So then we get into World War I. And in their minutes, they're saying how excited they are because they can already see the changes, basically taking the United States away from this isolationist perspective and trying to create a different view and a different American culture. So they were congratulating themselves. In fact, they had the brashness to send a telegram to Woodrow Wilson warning him not to end the war too quickly because they could already see the positive changes that were occurring. So then we get out of World War I, and they're congratulating themselves, and they see all these wonderful changes, and they said, well, how do we prevent the United States from going back? And they decided, well, in order to do this, we need to control education. So they said that's too big of a task, so what the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace does is they go to the Rockefeller Foundation, and they make a deal. They said, well, what you'll do is the Rockefeller Foundation will control those areas of education that are domestic in nature, and we will be responsible for those that are international in perspective. And that was agreed. And so then they discussed, well, and it was agreed between both the foundations that they need to start working on the control of history. In fact, it's kind of an interesting quote that Orwell made in 1984. He said, those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past will control the future. So you can see they started looking at how do we control history. So they then go to the top historians of the day. There were like 4 of them, like Charles and Mary Beard and some others. And they said, okay, well, would you teach history to this perspective? And they were turned down flat. So they said, well, we're going to have to get our own historians. So they go to the Guggenheim Foundation. And they bring the Guggenheim Foundation, and they say, okay, if we identify 20 or so young people who are looking at getting a PhD in history, would you grant them scholarships? And that was agreed. And with the Guggenheim Foundation also tying in with the Rhodes Foundation, the Rhodes Scholar Foundation, they took this nucleus of historians to England, kind of showed them, here's what you're going to be doing. And then after that, they came back to this country. They formed the nucleus of what we know today as the American Historical Association, or American Historical Society. So following that, and then funds were put into that organization, and basically what was happening then is you started seeing book after book come out that basically started blasting the founding fathers. And a lot of we were basically teaching history from more of a British perspective. So from there, we had a situation where things were shifting, and these foundations, and now of course we have, today I was thinking about that, if you look at the Gates Foundation, so maybe you have to understand this, and this gets back into more of what's going on and why. Basically, when you look at the condition of a population or a condition of a race, it's the use to which wealth is being put, often other than by those who were involved with its creation. In other words, wealth becomes targeted, wealth becomes controlled, and then what they'd use that wealth for is to further their own ends. So it's kind of interesting to look at Bill Gates founding the Gates Foundation, and you look at some of the things that they've been involved with, which I'm not particularly pleased with all of the things that they've been doing. But you look at, now we have this huge amount of wealth that was created with Microsoft, and now what we're looking at is what is the purpose and use of that wealth. So, you have a question?
Well, I'm going to throw out there, I know what they're up to now.
Yeah.
But genocide? Basically, they're population control.
Population control would be one of them. If you look at, trying to get at why, that's always the interesting question, and I don't know if I can give you, I have speculation, so I can tell you, here's what I think.
Okay.
But I can tell you, yes, they are interested in population reduction. In some cases that might be good, but the way they are going about it is not necessarily, I wouldn't consider this necessarily, the way they're doing it I would consider to be evil.
What are they doing?
So we could go through natural population reduction, voluntarily and through defined programs, and for example, limit birth during certain years and that kind of thing. We could do that naturally. I don't think they believe that will happen naturally. So then we're looking at how would we bring about a reduction of the population, and they can do that through war, through viruses, which is one of the reasons for biological weapons and some of those other things which could also be used on the population. So there is an interest in systematically bringing down the population. When you look at what is their end game, it would be to create an elite group that runs the world with a minimal race of people to carry out.
It sounds like if that's true, they already kind of have that, if they've been running it for the past
Yes.
120 years.
So, in the course of this investigation, Norman gave a presentation. Actually, the American Civil Liberties Union asked him to talk to a group of executive secretaries involved with these different foundations. And they had a right to know. They wanted to know if in this investigation would it interfere with any of their standard activities. So he's talking for perhaps 30 minutes, and somebody comes by and they put a note in his hand. And he reads the note, and it said, "Meet me at the bar of the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C." And he just dismissed it and went on with his talk. And after this presentation that he gave, the gentleman from the ACLU came up to him and said, I know you received that note, and I would meet him. I think it's somebody you need to know. He is the most powerful lobbyist in Washington. And so Norman said, okay, I'll go meet with this gentleman. And so he does. He goes to the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. In fact, when I went on vacation to Washington, D.C., I stayed at the Mayflower Hotel and went to the bar where they met just to see what was going on. But anyway, he finds himself in the presence of as he described it, a very cultured, learned individual, in his words. The gentleman was, his name was Hermann Adelsberg. He was, and introduced himself as the head of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. And what happened was, this individual actually represented some very powerful individuals, and what he claimed was the 3 most powerful men in the country at that time, back in the 50s. And Norman was sort of a curiosity. You got to remember, here's somebody that came out of the banking world. So all of these people, how could somebody from finance be against what they're doing? You know, so they began to talking, and Norman was very, inquisitive, very interested in what he was doing. When he said what organization he belonged to, he said he acted like he didn't really know much about that, and asked him more questions about it. And so over time, in this conversation, he began to pour out some very relevant, interesting insight. And he made this statement. He said, Norman, and he used the terms we, he said, we have amassed so much power that power will ultimately destroy us. Unfortunately, if it destroys us, it'll destroy everything else in the country. And he said, as we get closer to our goals, and I think this is what's happening, as we get closer to our goals, we start coming to the surface. And it becomes easier for someone to pick up the pieces and follow the trail back to our doorstep.
So they're being more exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But he said, Norman, we think we have enough power to prevent that from ever happening, but we're not sure. And he said, this is our problem. And Norman, being the congenial guy, said, well, if I find anything in my investigation that can help you, I'll be sure to let you know. And that was agreed, and they left on good terms. And so later on, Norman was called to testify and gave a fairly objective report. But he did mention this organization. He wanted to find out if there was any flack. This organization, most of the time, it's known, the anti-defamation is usually known for stamping out anti-Semitism. But actually, that's just a facade. They tend to be an organization which actually works toward, it's an intelligence gathering network. And that came out because he was told that Norman people will be called to testify, and I can tell you and assure you that no one will be called that you could call to testify. There would be somebody that we don't have a dossier on.
Right.
And they offered to help. He said, you just come down, we'll go through the list of people that might want to come forward, and we can go through that. And that was quite significant.
We did want to interject that this is a live call-in show, and if anyone has any questions for what Michael's speaking, our number is 360-693-7544. We'd welcome your call.
Yeah, he's given out a wealth of information, and so, I know probably people are probably kind of just sitting there just amazed at what's coming out, but please call in so we can ask more questions. I'm pretty sure this is probably going to take a 4-part series. But I want to ask you a question. Sure. When you say un-American, what were they gauging it by as un-American?
Well, that was kind of an interesting thing. In fact, he said they really didn't have a clear definition of what they meant by un-American. But I think you could put it in these terms. Look at what were the fundamental principles that led to the foundation of this country, and were these, let's say, against the greater good? And when you look at, was it destructive to the United States? Obviously, if we're using grant-making capacity to merge the United States with the Soviet Union, we're probably not considered to be pro-American, especially during we got to remember this is Cold War days when we were talking.
So
about
anything going against the foundation of America was anti-American.
Mm-hmm. Back in remember at that time we were afraid of communism, and you remember that's about the time Dodd knew McCarthy personally, and he knew he was being set up, and knew what was going on. There's a lot when you get into the whole McCarthy thing. Certain intelligence came forward that there were certain spy rings operating within the executive branch of the U.S. government. France and Britain also had that same intelligence. France went in and cleaned house and basically found these spies, got rid of them. We had that same intelligence, but it was, and this is what prompted the whole McCarthy thing. And I think today people think of it as a witch hunt. there was something going on behind. There was more to the whole story. But we never did uncover. We knew that we had intelligence that said there was a spy ring operating, but we never uncovered them. There was a lot of resignations. You know, when you might remember there was a list, but
The Hollywood blacklist and
yes,
such.
but also within government there was something like I don't remember. I think it was a couple hundred, and a lot of them resigned when those came out. And I remember, you know, seeing as a young man, we saw the film pictures of McCarthy, and it looks like he's just a kook and whatever. But he said he was set up. And ultimately, by the way, what I'm telling you, if this came out in the committee, this would be a whole different story and probably a whole different world today. But ultimately, it got shut down. And the individual that he claimed shut it down, well, I can tell you he's an instrument, but it was William Casey, who later became the director of the CIA under Reagan. And Casey was head of the Republican National Committee. He put pressure on, I think it was Wayne Hayes back in those days, and basically disrupted the sessions, and then ultimately they got the thing shut down before all of this stuff came out. Basically, all the United States Congress had to do was subpoena the minute books of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The whole story was there. It was written down. All they had to do was bring that information forward, and you could see here's what's been happening with the use of this wealth.
And why didn't they?
Because of you got to remember, so that's the battle, and evidently they had enough power to prevent someone from bringing that forth. But it's been interesting, as you remember, I was studying this in 1980, and so back in the mid-'80s or early '80s when I was going into this, and here we are 30 years later, and it's kind of a whole different world today. I can tell you lots of things that I thought were going to happen. You know, it's kind of like, especially with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union, and it's kind of like they went into another plan. But things that I used to say, I guess I have satisfaction to say, I told you so. We're seeing more and more our freedoms being eroded. We have kind of the illusion of freedom. It's like,
Right.
some of my Canadian friends tell me, you guys are so controlled down here, you don't even know it. And we're seeing that eradicated. We see things like the Patriot Act and a number of other things that have been slowly but surely introduced that have eradicated those fundamental principles of our government. There were certain practices, you know, that have to be eliminated, but what's happening is we're getting more and more and closer to their goals. And it's either they're going to collapse, you know, as he said, that power ultimately is going to destroy them, like power always does. Right. And we're going to break through in who knows, like some kind of revolution or upheaval. What I'm seeing is the population's becoming more and more awake.
Yeah.
People are starting to wake up to these things. There's so much today on the internet that 30 years ago you wouldn't have seen.
Well, nobody even knew about the Bilderberg meetings, and now that's absolutely huge.
I guess we have a call.
Yeah, so wait one second here.
We have a call?
But yeah, but the Bilderberg meetings, just them being exposed is huge. You know, more and more people are gathering at their meetings and exposing them. So yeah, it sounds like we've got a phone call.
Okay.
Sure.
Hey, caller, you're live on the air.
Hey guys, this is Jesse from the Whisper Room.
Okay.
So I had a question myself.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so what I wanted to know regarding to the founding fathers and the way they kind of structured our government and kind of built us in a specific way. They had a vision. And do you think with these groups who are out there, who are manipulating everything behind the scenes, do you think we're slowly going away from that plan, what they had originally intended?
Actually, yes. And you know, I have to go back to some of the things that Norman Dodd talked about. He talked about a natural order, and basically a structure of society, government, and the relationships of all of these different elements that make up a society, such that that society would be able to live in perpetuity. In other words, live forever. How would you make a stable kind of civilization? And when he looked at this model that he had worked on for many, many years, and he looked at the foundation of this country, that was an ideal time when things were in place. We basically had a clean slate. We got away from all of the baggage of the European community, and we started fresh. But what he said was, starting with the ratification of the United States Constitution, they have continually worked to eradicate it. So let me give you a simple example. Let's take this tripartite structure of the government. And what I mean by that is we have the three parts. We had an executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And think about a triangle. And you think about that triangle as being one of the more stable forms of a structure. From an engineering standpoint, I call that a truss. So we have this structure of government with checks and balances. So one of the things that they did is they introduced something called administrative agencies as a fourth arm. So we started getting things like OSHA and we get into all of these other organizations. So, and you look at some of these administrative agencies, you find that they're dealing with executive, legislative, and judicial. So you go into, you challenge an OSHA, finding or whatever. You have to go through their systems to challenge it.
Well, but wouldn't that just be a branch of the executive?
Yes, what I'm saying, it becomes a branch, and what I'm saying, that fourth branch starts upsetting the triangle.
Oh, okay.
So he said, but basically what's happening is they start turning it inside out. And so the form of government today isn't completely different. Now, of course, we went from promoting the general welfare to providing the general welfare. And we started slowly introducing different ideas into our society, and of course then controlling education and all of those things that have kind of upset the foundations. So slowly but surely, and then of course you see things like, as we just talked about, something like the Patriot Act, and look at what that's done to the Constitution. We have, and then we get into, do we have freedom of press? One of the things why I love FVTV is I can talk about this stuff and nobody's going to filter me.
Right.
But we have a controlled media. We have the internet, which still has kind of opened up. That has kind of sent shockwaves through the system because part of their strategy was always to control the message, control the narrative. That's what you see through the standard media. And so we're seeing those kinds of things.
Speaking of that, why don't we give out the number? I can't see it, so Michael, you want to give it?
Jesse, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I'm still on the line, and that was some good feedback. I appreciate the information. Very enlightening.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse.
Bye.
So our phone number is 360-693-7544. If any callers out there want to call in. We got Michael here, and we're going to be bringing up our next guest here in just a minute. But Carol, do you have a question, our co-host?
I do. I noticed that as you're up there speaking, you keep saying they. You said they turned it inside out. Well, as we know, you also mentioned the Patriot Act. A lot of people do not understand that the Patriot Act disconnected our legislative branch from the Constitution. And I don't know if you know about what's happening today with Obama signing or making that immigration, forgiving those 5 million or something people. People are very upset about that and calling him a tyrant and a dictator. This is an article I read. So now, doing those kinds of things and being unhooked from our Constitution, one, how do we get our Constitution back? And who are they? And as you've gone through this research, how have you been able not to fracture yourself? How have you been able to stay stable and together knowing all of this information?
Oh, there's a number of questions. Well, I suppose I should answer the question, and again, I was honoring Norman Dodd, who, by the way, who passed away in about 1984 or 5. I will tell you who he claimed was they. And this is something you'll never read in any books. You will not have heard this anywhere else. And so I will give you what he described. And I don't know if it's the complete they, and I'll give you some other insight after that. But let me tell you what he said. And this is actually why I tracked him down. I was trying to find out who he thinks they are. So what he claimed was, historically, you have to go back into, for example, the 1600s. And he said, if you look at Amsterdam, and the Rhine River comes out through Germany and comes out and exits into Amsterdam, there was a tremendous amount of transportation and shipping that occurred in that area. And he said at the time that the House of Orange, which is the monarchy in the Netherlands at the time, amassed the largest consolidation of private wealth that the world had ever seen. And what happened, of course, is, and you may know this, that William and Mary ascended to the throne of England. They were from the House of Orange. Shortly after they became king and queen of England, then the Bank of England was formed. And what happened was, there was a entity. It was actually a large holding company in Belgium. It no longer, I think it's been bought out. But this holding company was known as Société Générale de Belgique. It was formed 150 years ago, and it basically operated. It controlled something like, I don't know, 40% of the Belgian economy at one time. But that organization was a facade. And he said behind that was a group who controlled the wealth. Now, he later ran into a gentleman who worked for G2, which is Army Intelligence. And he said, well, maybe you could tell me who you think this is, who are they, to answer these questions. And he said, well, I believe the center managerial directing body is the directorate of a holding company in Brussels known as Société Générale de Belgique. And so this gentleman was like shocked. And he said, sir, do you realize how right you are? And he said, well, it's only the conclusion, and it's such a serious conclusion that I would never want anybody to take my word for it, and without doing their own research. And he said, well, let me tell you, ever since I got out of college, I worked for Army Intelligence, and I've had one mission, and that mission is, or has been, to ride herd on the directorate of Société Générale de Belgique, which is kind of interesting that he had a mission that Army Intelligence knew that this is a group that they needed to watch. Well, when you look at this wealth, and you have to start looking at the mechanism, and maybe this will start making sense. When you look at, as I said, I think earlier, is that when you look at the condition of a people, and you look at the use of wealth, and the use of that wealth and what that wealth is being put, that will affect the society. So the plan has always been for this group is to control the use of wealth. And what they will do is they will earmark certain areas of industry, or, for example, in the banking world. When we look at the Rothschilds, a lot of people think that they were at the core, but I can tell you the Rothschilds could be considered franchisees to control the banking in different countries. Same thing with the Warburgs and Kuhn Loeb. They were administered by this. There was a central control. That's why when we go into as I mentioned earlier, we look at the Bolshevik Revolution, who was coordinating? Why were all these funds coming from all these different sources and bringing it together? But it's not just in the banking world, but it's others. So we start looking at, and if we get into the whole medical world, we start looking at the Rockefeller Foundation and their influence over the teaching of the medical schools, right, with the Flexner Report, and that basically shook up the whole teaching of medicine, and then they started working on control. So it became a controlled industry. The other areas would be the control of energy, such as, like the Rockefellers were involved with oil and as well as pharmaceuticals. So, so that what they do is they earmark certain things, and that's why I think Gates now goes along with their program, is because that wealth was earmarked. He met an individual in 1939. He had a group of people over to his home who was, and he was making it a presentation, basically talking about, well, he said it was the natural order, and this gentleman, there was 4 gentlemen there, and one who had showed up who came in presence of somebody else, in place of somebody else. And so midway through this discussion, this guy jumps up and he starts going out of the room, and Norman follows, and when he's out of the hearing range of others, he called it out of earshot, he said, Norman, and by the way, what Norman first suspected was this guy was socially uncomfortable. He was with a group of people that he doesn't know, and so he said, here, we'll postpone this discussion, and Mrs. Dodd will fix our dinner, and we'll have a enjoyable evening. And this guy turned on him, and this guy said, Norman, I'm probably the only person in the United States who you could possibly meet that has any idea of the full significance of what it is you're talking about. And I can tell you that my life is dedicated to ensuring that what you're talking about never see the light of day. If you force me to stay, I will not be responsible for anything that happens to you or your family. Good night. And he leaves. That gentleman was named Alexander Sachs. Alexander Sachs is known historically because he was the go-between between Einstein and Roosevelt. Later, and he mentioned this briefly in one of his discussions, Alexander Sachs was the franchise administrator for this country. In other words, he was coordinating. In other words, making sure that whoever these franchises were, like Kuhn Loeb in those days, was a big entity. They were, and by the way, when I talked about Hermann Adelsberg, the people that he worked for were the partners of Kuhn Loeb, which included Jacob Schiff, Otto Kahn, and I think it was Max Warburg that were involved with that. One of the Warburgs. It might have been Felix Warburg. So when you look at this, what you're seeing is this is this level of control of how they are. So who are they? Now we look at, I have a good friend, Fritz Springmeier, who wrote his book on Bloodlines of the Illuminati. We're trying to get him to do a presentation on FVTV, but he talks about the bloodlines and how they've maintained this through bloodlines. There does exist an organization known as the Illuminati, and I can't tell you how they all fit, how they control it, but I can tell you that because Fritz was was connecting with the individual who's the head of the Illuminati, I know that this individual told one of the Rothschilds to help Fritz. So I know that they're involved with how all this stuff works. Now, so there's a number of groups. Sometimes it's circles within circles, and trying to sort it out, and there's different levels of control. The other interesting question is, how do you stay sane when you start uncovering this? It's such a horrible subject. One of the things that I always found interesting over the years, especially as a young man investigating this, in the investigation of this stuff, this what might be considered a horrible topic, I met the nicest people. You look at the people that are really getting into this stuff and trying to uncover it, trying to figure out what's going on. Some of the greatest, people that I've known. It's people that generally have good values, and they're people with good values, and they recognize something's right, something's wrong going on here, and something's going against my values. But internally, you have to realize this is what's going on. You need to. And what I always encourage people to do is you have to sort through this stuff. It's difficult. Truth is I'm going to have to use another Norman Dodd quote that I think everybody should maybe write this down. He said, "Truth is very expensive, possibly costing the gift of life itself." When you look at trying to determine what is real and what is not real, it's expensive. So when you look at trying to uncover this, you need to use discernment. You have to figure out what is and isn't real. You need to look at, truth generally doesn't conflict with truth, and you have to figure out what happened, and if it did happen, is it significant, and try to sort through and come to an understanding. But that's part of what our journey is as we go through life, is trying to make sense of this world, and I think everybody's trying to do. A lot of
Right.
people, I think, live in a bubble.
Yep.
What I've gone into today, if most people, it's kind of this line, can you handle the truth? And well, I can tell you, when I started looking at wealthy individuals involved with the formation of communism, I can tell you as a young man, that was an emotional, my whole worldview shifted. I could almost not handle that. I mean, so I had to go through those, what you call a significant emotional event as you start dealing with it. You start realizing.
Shift.
Yeah, paradigm shift. And what happens is, and it works this way, the mind has we form these constructs of how we think the world works. And generally it's internally consistent. We look at all these facts, we gather them, and we tend to accept those things which seem to be most pleasing to believe. And we take those things in. And every once in a while, you're going to come across knowledge that's going to be it's going to shake you. It's kind of like whether you should take the blue pill or the red pill. And once you go down this path, then you find, hey, maybe the world isn't the way it is. But I believe right now, what's happened is what we've been talking about is coming closer and closer to their goals. So what's going to happen is it's coming more and more to the surface. Now, and I reminded there was a gentleman used to teach how to cheat at poker, a scientist basically, and basically he called this technique called neo-cheating, and he said if you know how to do this, you can cheat very effectively, and it was actually using partners, and you could cheat. But he said if you understood the mechanism that people use to cheat like that, it's obvious, you can see them. And so what we have is these neo-cheaters out there. And as we start understanding and gaining knowledge, they can't pull this stuff over on us. And so that's part of what we're doing with our journey, is we're learning, hey, we have to understand, hey, this is what's going on, and it becomes obvious. You can kind of see. This stuff starts coming on the news, and hey, I don't think this makes sense.
I think that's what's making more people mad, because they're actually waking up to it.
Yeah, and I will say it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough mentally. And what I've said tonight, there's a lot of people that would never. Would you really believe that the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace was involved with trying to get us into war, trying to control the State Department? You would.
Yep, you would have never thought of it.
This breaks some foundations, and these are the groups, when we look at the Rockefeller Foundation, all of these that are doing all this, they claim all this good as well. So the public facade is that they're wonderful, but
Yep.
behind the scenes, they're doing something completely different. And it's like Norman said, you start looking at what are they doing with this wealth, and what's the effect of the use of this wealth.
Well, I guess, I'm one of them that has a hard time believing it. Granted, I don't think, mega corporations are any great thing. I don't think they're out for anyone but themselves, but I think their main interest, at least to my belief, is just money, and I don't understand how causing a war or trying to instigate a war is going to help them at all, or control the population is going to help them at all. I mean, if selling products and services is what made them rich, why would they want to kill off customers?
Okay. So interesting assumption. The interesting assumption is that this is for money, and I can assure you, these people don't need money.
And then what is it for?
These people, we're talking about people that control trillions of dollars. Money is for us. These people are so far beyond the need of money. We're talking about multi-billionaires. And they have more money and wealth than they could possibly spend.
Yeah, I heard the Rockefellers have enough money to supply everybody in the world a house, 3 cars, medical, food, for something like 30 years. Or something astronomical. I think it was longer than that. I'm just setting a low number. But they could supply everybody and still be okay.
Yeah, so there's something else behind the scenes.
So
There's
what do
something-
you suppose that they're trying to do?
Oh, you
I
get-
mean, or what is their goal? Like world domination, but to what end? Why all the trouble?
all right, so I have struggled over the years trying to get into their mindset, trying to figure out what is it that is motivating them. And you have to realize, you know, and Carol always likes to say that they're psychopaths, but I think many of them think they're creating this utopia on Earth where they believe that they actually think in their twisted way of thinking that this is the ultimate, and they think the ends justify the means. But they want to create, it's basically control of the world running under their program with basically what will ultimately be a slave class and then an elite class.
Well, that's interesting. You know, we need to bring up our next guest. We're running out of
Yes.
time here.
Oh.
And I want to bring Michael up, but Michael's still going to be here. The three amigos are going to be here.
Amigos.
Be four amigos
Yes.
with Adrian,
Yeah.
but three Mikes will be up here. Michael's. But this is Michael, Mr. G,
Mike, nice seeing you.
and he's a good friend of mine. Good to see you, Michael. Yeah, fascinating.
Michael.
We can get back to this here, but we just want to bring you up here in case you have some questions also. And
I got all kinds of questions, but that would take about 3 nights.
well,
I love that stuff.
yeah. So, Michael's a teacher downtown Vancouver, accomplished guitarist, and also a historian.
I love history. Every year it becomes more of a relic. So.
Can we get a microphone on? We need to set up some mics for Michael or Mr. G. I think that'd be easier.
Mr. G?
Yep, call him Mr. G.
G
Well,
and G.
what's your last name, or do you mind saying?
No, I don't mind saying. It's just, it's almost the alphabet. It's Giamateo.
Okay.
So, yeah. Took me a couple years to learn how to say it.
What origin is that? Like nationality, or
Pretty Italian,
Okay.
yeah. And so G's a lot easier to remember. When I was teaching in public ed, it just became Mr. G, and so Mrs. G suggested that I just name my school of guitar Mr. G School of Guitar. So a lot of people might think the G stands for guitar, and that's okay too. But yeah, I'm not a performing artist. I teach. I'm a
Yes.
teacher. But
You are tonight.
I play. I love to play. I can play little snippets. I can talk a little bit about, I guess, what I do when I'm working with a student. If you have questions, am I supposed to talk into the mic, or is?
Yeah, that's a directional mic, so it should pick up whatever you're.
All right.
yeah,
So
whatever
if I
you're
look at
saying,
you
you're
guys.
fine. Yeah, you can talk to us.
All right.
You should be fine.
But thanks for this opportunity. This is
They
great.
said it sounded good. So,
Yeah. this is
so
cool.
what's your passion?
Teaching. I love teaching. I love watching the musical voice in a student grow. You know, I like when a student first kind of gets that they have a musical voice inside. You know, for some reason, most of us, when we start to play an instrument, have this kind of false agreement that we have to sound exactly like whoever we're trying to play, like what we hear on the radio or on our iDevices, before we can play for anyone. But if it's a language, which there are aspects of music that are very similar to a language, and so I use that approach. I'm very passionate about that, understanding the language of music and helping others to see that. Then, you know, the way we start talking, our verbal language is immediate. When we have 30 or 40 word vocabulary, we still say what we want. You know, when you're around little kids, they say what they want, even though they only know 50 words maybe, right? And that's how we get good. And so with music, when I can find a student and, you know, there's controlling the instrument, you know, exercises. You've been through some. And then there's the theory of music, which is the language. So, like with the adults, sometimes that's a difficult thing for them to grasp because they're so used to playing an instrument to sound just like your artist, your favorite artist, or your song. But to have a child who hasn't maybe been exposed to different genres, just whatever's in their home or whatever they're hearing on television or in movies, what is that musical voice, that sound that they have inside before they ever heard music outside? And that's, it's almost an impossible task because we hear music when we're in the womb. We hear music when we're infants. Before it becomes music with the name, a label, it's music. What is the sound that's inside? And so that's my passion, working with all ages, and I teach from like 6 up to, way past retirement age, and the whole range of absolute beginner to somebody who's professional, but they just want to know more about music, or somebody who really understands a lot about music, but they want to get more proficient. So, working with them individually, I'm really passionate about what music means to the student. And then when they tell me what they want, and I can see where they're at, as I start to give them exercises, I can see their natural strengths emerge, and then I can coach that, So I like to see it, and then I really enjoy coaching music. So my music lessons are like a huddle, I guess. And it doesn't take long. If somebody grabs a guitar, if I hand them the guitar and they go like this, I can pretty much see that they've played electric guitar and rock, maybe classic rock. If they pick it up and they go like this, they've probably played some kind of folk or soft rock or singer-songwriter stuff. A finger picker would be in this position right here, because you can play so much from this position. So, like for example, a finger picker, like I would do something like. So you end up with this kind of a fingering. That kind of stuff is.
So you can pick that up right from the point when they pick up a guitar and see how they're moving their fingers?
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody's picking up the guitar and their fingers are way back here, they're pressing way too hard. If you want to be right up, what I call perfect placement, it's just right up against the fret, you don't have to press as hard. Your finger tip right there is just a smaller point of contact, so you don't have to press as hard. So you don't hurt your fingers so much in the beginning, and you also get a lighter touch, which transfers into the sound as just a more fluid. If you're right up against that and you have the lightest touch, then you're a little more free to play what you're hearing in your head, just grabbing those notes. But if you're back here, you can hear players that play back here. They press real hard, their playing can sound labored, and their notes will be flat. Even though the string stops at the metal fret there, when you're back here, you're extending the length of that string, so your note's going to be a little low, but as you lift your finger off, now you've pulled everything flat. So if your chord's back here, it's a little dull. Up here, definitely it'll ring longer. So yeah, just watching how somebody picks up a guitar, knowing that they're stuck in a little small space with the teacher looking at their hands, most people stop breathing, and so we work on that, breathe, and lightening your touch so that way you can check in. It's all about like building neural pathway development to your hands. So there's controlling the instrument, understanding a little about the language of music, and then when you play songs you might have heard since you were a child, or maybe just new songs, the student will start to actually have a music appreciation. They'll understand the structure a little bit instead of just being this kind of ambiguous wall of amazing sound that's unattainable to learn, or just really not even accessible. It starts to actually sound like maybe 2 chords or 3 chords. You can start to hear a melody and a bass line with a chord progression. And so it becomes just this journey, and you can play an instrument or understand and appreciate an instrument, for the next 120 years, however long you want to live.
Is it harder to work with somebody that has been playing, just have bad
Not at all. What's
Habits.
difficult are students who can't hear when they're playing something off beat or off pitch. Those are the ones that are challenging. But it's just access. You know, it's just finding whatever that. Sometimes it is like children. Usually, if they, you know, you buy a guitar for a 5 or 6 year old child, they usually just kind of want to beat on it, and that's fine. Just work with them on a little bit of rhythm. You know, self-included, we can all work on on a rhythm. But every once in a while, you know, someone wants to just learn a technique like a blues, you know, and I'll show them like little blues things. But if somebody's like a lead guitar player and I hand them the guitar in the lesson and they come up with single note stuff, then I know it. It's like, okay, you're a single note player. You know? It's pretty telling. So anyway, do you want to ask me questions? Or?
I was wondering now, does everybody have some unique music that resonates with them?
Yeah, and maybe a lot. I assert it's possibly a lot of us don't know it until we have some kind of an experience. Either the music reminds us of something. Like I was thinking about Baker Street, you know, Jerry Rafferty's song. And for some strange reason, I just had this flashback to when that was on the radio and I was driving a lot in my old Le Mans. And I had blue fur on the dash, and I had a Pioneer stereo, and I'd forgotten that, but I saw details on that stereo just from me playing some of the chords. Doesn't sound really anything like the original version, but it was enough. So music at some point, usually around high school, is just associated with the whole experience. It's just another sensory thing that's happening. So a lot of people at some point, and Rock Band and Guitar Hero, that stuff, really kind of boosted the interest of playing guitar. So a lot of people were showing up at my studio wanting to learn, but the classic rock songs were the ones that were licensed. So they started, you know, of all ages, kids coming in and wanting to know, you know, some Aerosmith stuff. It just kind of blew my mind, a lot of AC/DC and that kind of stuff. But other people, after they've maybe raised kids, remember that stuff when it came out, and they have been looking for whatever that connection is to that music. And so it's pretty thrilling to just start playing like 3 chords, and then you're going, wow, that kind of sounds like the song. You know, whatever they're into. And so it's fun. It's really cool to see that.
Oh, I just wanted to interject that if anyone had a question for Michael, Michael number 3, our phone number
Mr. G,
is
3M.
Yeah, Mr. G, Mr. G. Our
Mm.
phone number is 360-693-7544. It was funny that you mentioned Baker Street. The saxophone solo in that. It was supposed to be a guitar solo, but the guitarist was out sick when they recorded the studio version, so they just filled with the saxophone as a temporary fix, just so they would have the tempo going.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they ended up liking it better with the saxophone and left it in.
Oh, it
and
totally
I mean, that's
works.
the most recognizable part of that song.
You know something about that song? Because when I started playing it, one of my students, just about 3 weeks ago, brought his iPhone in and we played it. I completely forgot that when the words come in, somebody's going crazy on the bongos. Through the whole part, I'm going, I never even noticed those were in there. It's almost distracting.
No,
it's
I
just
want to go
crazy.
listen. Yeah, I don't recall any bongos.
Yeah, I didn't either until I brought it back, but it's just like going crazy. It's right when the words are going on the verse. But yeah, I was in high school. I actually started playing guitar my senior year, but up till that point I was a sax player. I was a horn snob. I actually used to make fun of guitar players, mock us. See what I get for judging, I guess? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what it was. I just thought, well, everybody can do this. My sister had a guitar, and I thought, that's just so easy. Why would anybody, you know, saxophone takes discipline. But no, they all do.
Well, how did you get into the guitar? How did you transition?
Kind of an embarrassing story, but my sister had a guitar and I was a horn snob, and nobody wanted me to take my horn to the woods anymore. They said, you know, grab your sister's guitar, and so brought that up there, and girls said, can you play Stairway? And I was like, no, and then they'd wander away, so I thought, well, you know. And that's all I needed to play, and so I just thought, well, okay, I'll go back to my horn. Well, then I saw Santana, and that was it. I just tried to play all that stuff on my horn, and then I just thought, well, I could do that on the guitar, you know. You know, he just like, you does that kind of bending. And so I went out and bought a Strat. He didn't play a Strat, but Hendrix did, and I discovered him at the same time. But I saw Santana, and it was all over. I'd never seen anybody do what he did on stage. He mumbled something in the microphone with a thick accent, and then said, Portland, this one's for you. And he started playing a song. It was Europa. And towards the end, he hits this really high note. He was just sobbing. I mean, like pouring tears and just stomping his foot and sobbing. And I was like the 6th or 7th row back. I just never seen that, caught up in the moment. So, that happens in high school. Sometimes you have a great experience and a song's on the radio. And when you're, maybe 35 or 40 years old and you have a chance, take a guitar lesson because you want to learn that song. Even though the people that wrote that song and performed that song, if they went on tour, they'd have to listen to the recording because they probably don't remember how they played it back then. Songs morph. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And a lot more.
So what song did you woo your wife with?
She loved sax, but I quit before we met. About 4 years ago, one of my students wanted to play Stairway to Heaven, and I completely forgot that I'd ever learned it. And so we were on a walking trail, and I just started figuring it out again, going, that's right. And when I got about there, just like in high school, I looked at her, and she was all googly, and I went, wow, it still works.
I'm going to play this every night.
But no, I do want to hear that. But the truth is, as a guitar player, I would take her out to see superior guitar players and let them do all the work, and then just come home, right?
There you go.
Anyway.
I was just going to say, my girlfriend's a pretty big Led Zeppelin fan, and so am I. Do you know Barney R?
Brian, it's an alternate tuning.
Okay.
At one point, I kind of learned it, but what happened when I saw Santana was I started to play some Santana stuff. And then I went back because I was a huge Zeppelin fan. And then I went back and started listening, and just Page was my main influence then after that. He was just amazing, He was doing all these multi-tracks, and he could play dirty, he could play clean, he could play front of the beat, back of the beat, top of the beat. He could just, he was a studio cat. So he would play 3 or 4 gigs in a session stuff, maybe with the symphony, and then maybe with a pop rock band, British band, and then something heavy, and then, so I thought, I'll just be a studio musician. But about the time I got into that, you really had to read well, and you really had to be on your top of your game. Before that, if you had a sound, you could be invited into the studio. Now it's come back to that, which is great. If you have a sound, you don't have to read. Understanding all of the theory doesn't make anybody a better guitar player. Playing makes us better guitar players, but understanding that theory has us become articulate. We can say what we want, not just what we think we're supposed to play or what's familiar from what we've heard, right? Does that answer your question?
No, yeah.
And I would love to teach you Bronjar Stomp sometime, but let me relearn it.
Well, could you play a song?
That's the beginning of it, right?
I was thinking the more, there's another one. There's Bronny R Stomp, and then there's Bronny R, which I think is on,
3 maybe?
I think it's on Physical Graffiti.
Oh yeah, I love Physical Graffiti. I just play doodles of my songs. They're not copyrighted, so maybe. But this is one I've been working on lately. I wrote this one when I was in high school, laying on my back, looking up at this huge willow tree we had, and so it's called Beneath the Willows. I'm just going to play part of it, but Highway 99 was First Independent Bank, and behind them, or First Undependable Bank, behind them was a willow tree, and I yanked the thing off and stuck it in the ground when I was a kid, and it grew into this huge tree.
I think that tree's still there.
I should go get another one, another stick. That's awesome. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Am I supposed to get up and leave, or should I stay?
No, you stay right here.
That is one of my favorite subjects, and I know that you're like on just 1/64th of everything that you could have said or probably wanted to say. There's so much more in there, but that's fascinating.
Thanks.
Love that stuff. Can't learn less.
Well, somebody that has an appreciation for history, that's,
I have books that most people would use for insomnia that
Yes.
keep me awake. I know you know that.
yes,
Keep-
yes. Yep.
God, what was I gonna ask? Do you, so playing, you know, I don't know what you would call them, traditional instruments,
Yeah.
you know, ones you have to have some talent to play. Do you have any respect at all for like electronic music, any of that, or do you find it like peasant stuff because you could just type a button and there it is?
No, I don't actually, I don't think that I look down on any music. I don't know. I studied jazz, and then I was around a lot of jazz players that just were not comfortable or something, and so it was hard for me to listen to that. But I used to study that, and I loved kind of playing it. I was never that good, but I could tell I could have been. But just like the kind of the consciousness of the people was really competitive. So then I went to blues, and I heard blues, but I didn't get blues until after my first divorce.
Winter the Blues.
But then it occurred to me, and blues players just, it didn't matter how poor anybody was playing, how great anybody played, they always received the same appreciation from the other artists. I mean, it's just like, somebody was just, something like really rough, hard to hear, but somebody would come up in the circle and just say, I just love your raw, you know, it just inspires me how you just play raw what you feel. And so I thought, those are my people, so I started hanging out with blues artists. But the truth is, I have students who wouldn't play anything that I play, but we work together, and they're probably pretty gracious, allowing me to, direct them away from, sometimes they'll play like hard death metal. But, my kids grew up with that, and so I have my opinions about what I like, but no, if it's played well, it means the people that are playing it love what they're doing, and then I just get caught up in it. It really doesn't matter.
That must have been cool having you as a dad, no one yelling at you to turn it down, turn that crap
If I
off.
give you my son's phone number, could you call and tell him that? I think the jury's out on whether he's happy with it. He's coming around now. The older one's, he's coming around. The younger one's about there. But thanks for saying so. I'm really good friends with my second student I ever had, and he's a great player, and we jam together. And he's such a great player as a result of him being really patient with me. Because my first few students that I had years ago, I was a poor teacher. I was really kind of bad teacher. And then I had some paradigm shifts about being a parent over time. But yeah, I wasn't great in the beginning. That's really trying to say it nice. I was probably pretty bad, but thanks. Got the point.
Yeah.
So Michael, how would people get a hold of you if
Oh.
they want to have some lessons or
Yeah.
just come down and visit? And I know the first time I met you, you just kind of welcomed me right in and grab a guitar and sit down. We just started chatting. It wasn't even about
Yeah. I remember that.
business deal. It was just about, hey, come in, relax, grab a guitar, and I think that's what you're probably doing, see what kind of fingering I was, how I was
Yeah.
playing.
Yeah, how
And then
someone-
we just kind of hit it off. And
Yeah, how somebody holds a guitar kind of tells you what they're comfortable with, and if somebody plays a lot, where they play can actually be pretty revealing. And so I'll look if somebody's using just a couple of fingers and they're sliding up and down one or two strings, then I'll try them, throwing some exercises out, but it's really about controlling 4 frets. And once you can control 4 frets here, you can play all of the chords in one key right here, not even moving your finger really, First finger can kind of stay planted there. 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord, and back to the 1 chord. And then you can play all the scales within the 4 frets. That's all the key of D and the D scale. Once you can do that here, then your confidence is the same if you do it up here or here. So when somebody's just trying to do 1 or 2 things with their fingers, then I start just kind of guiding them back to the 4 fret control. And I think that's maybe what we did. I'm trying to remember, it's been a while. It's been like 12 years since I've seen you.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to get my pinky to do what I want it to do.
Oh, yeah.
That thing just wanted to go everywhere.
And you know, I'll come up with ideas by watching. A lot of times I have an idea kind of what I want to cover, but it's really just based on the last lesson and what I saw. But it works better if the curriculum's created by assessment of the student instead of what I have and I want them to learn. So I will tell, like some of my players that want to play lead, I'll have them play and we'll go through scales, and then I'll say, forget you have your first finger, take it away and play everything you just did without your first finger, right? And if somebody is a rhythm player, I'll say, well, play all your chords without your first finger. You know, and that gets these ones connected to the brain. So they already have these ones connected. Once you get those, it just opens up a whole new world, right? So I think that's what we were doing with you. We'll find out.
We were doing a lot.
Yeah.
That's all I remember.
So do you play instrument?
No.
Not yet?
I respect it, I don't play it. And,
You play
yeah,
the radio,
my
right?
girlfriend has a guitar.
I was thinking that.
You know, my girlfriend, okay, I'll give it a shot.
All right, put your first finger right there.
Okay.
And your second finger right there against the fret. Now just slowly move this one up 1 string.
Okay,
All right, behind the fret. This one up 1 string.
okay.
This one up 1 string right to there.
Oh,
All right, up to here. 1 more. Are you breathing?
Kind of.
You want to breathe? And 1 more. And then this one up here. Now on a scale from 1 to 10, if 10's your full grip and 1 is almost nothing, where are you at?
Probably 2 or 3.
Are you?
I guess.
I feel like more than that. My hands are cold. Sorry about that. Okay, continue up. Just real slow.
Oh, slow.
Yeah. And then 1 more. All right. Come down the same way. Finger that led up, have it come down. Look at that. Looks like you've done this before.
Nope. We have, my girlfriend has a guitar, and we used to hang it, you know, above our bed, or, you know, by the headboard. And there were a couple times where I'd yawn and stretch, and my fingers would strum it, and the dogs would freak. So I learned if the dogs were annoying us in the bedroom, like, won't go to bed, I'd just reach up and I'd point to that guitar, and they both run. They just go hide.
So put 2 fingers right there.
The same fret?
Use these middle 2 fingers.
Okay.
And on the same fret, this string was 5, and then string 4 right below it.
Okay, 5 and 4.
Right there. And then just strum that. There you go. Now strum it 4 times. He's jamming.
There we go.
Excellent. You play the E minor. That's a E minor.
I was told there would be ladies if I was a rock star.
Just wait. Just wait.
It's coming.
They know now.
Studio
Word is out.
All right. Thank you, Mr. G.
You're welcome. Yeah. Absolutely. You did swell.
Thank you.
So, Michael, can you give out your location? If people
Yeah,
want to get in
I'm
contact with you?
at 508 Washington, right next to Briz Loan and Guitar, where I bought this for 159 bucks. Yeah, they have really good prices, and if you buy a guitar there, actually, you get a free lesson with me, so.
Oh, that's
It's,
good.
I'm at 508 Washington on, right by Plaid Pantry, across from Smith Tower, the big round landmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, 360-852-0562. I never call myself, that's it though.
You might have to give that out a couple more times over the show.
Yeah.
So, do you have a website?
I have a web page that apparently that's attached to Briz Loan and Guitars site. I don't ever update it. I do have an email. It's Mr. G's School at yahoo.com. MRGSSCHOOL. Mr. G's School at yahoo.com. That's
Facebook page or anything?
Oh, that's too modern for me. I'm a,
Good man, I hate Facebook.
I haven't been in the social media circle yet. I'm still waiting. Wait another 15 or 20 years and see how I
See how it
feel
works.
about it.
Yeah, I'm proud to admit I just got my first MySpace page. That's a joke.
I thought you were going to talk about Smedley Butler and the war as a racket for a second there.
You mean when they were going to take over the? There was actually a coup.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say at one point.
No, see, I don't know if I can remember the whole story. That was right around, I think it was the 1930s.
Yeah, it was
wasn't
really close. I was thinking 2930, somewhere in there. Right?
Yeah, I don't know if people know this in our history, but there was basically a plan from some military leaders to form a coup and take over the country.
Yeah, and put in the highest ranking Marine,
Yep.
I think it was,
Yep.
right? Smedley Butler. And
Yeah.
instead, he
Yeah.
spilled the beans.
Yep, told them, yeah, and they rounded him up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's always a fascinating chapter.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. But I think a lot of the militaries, you kind of got to go along with the program. But I think there's some good people in the military that are just kind of
Oh, absolutely. My son-in-law.
waking up
one of
and
those guys.
realizing, hey, I don't think maybe the direction that we've been heading is where we need to be heading.
Yeah,
So I think there's some good guys, on our side.
it would really behoove us as a people to just offer some just real history to our children.
Exactly.
Because you have to, because that's one of the things that I was sort of upset with is the Gates Foundation has a big initiative to basically rewrite and come up with a different presentation of how they teach U.S. history,
Yeah.
and I think that's dangerous stuff.
Yeah, social studies used to have 4 parts when we were in school. Now they're down to 2. I think they've eliminated civics and maybe economics.
Yeah.
Yeah, geography's pretty weak, but history's been washed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, another interesting Don anecdote was, he was educated, as I said, at Andover, which is a private school, and he had a history teacher who would give him an assignment, and he'd have to go to the library and look up, they'd give him 2 references, and he'd go and he'd look up these 2 references, and he said, every time I do that, the stories contradicted each other.
Mhm.
And that's his introduction to learning how do you figure out what really happened in history.
Right, learn how to learn.
Yeah, as opposed to, our history is, what really happened. You think about what's going on here in the world today, trying to sort out what is and is not. What's going to happen 50 years from now? Are we going to really uncover what really happened, or is it going to get whitewashed? And by the way, I should probably give a notice that tomorrow is the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. Here it is, how many years? 50 years later, we're still
51.
trying to figure out what happened. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember having the epiphanic question moment of, well, we all know about Watergate, but what was the president looking for?
yeah.
And then when we find out it was his campaign donors from 48 on were
Yep.
2 of the 3 biggest crime bosses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you. But anyway, fascinating subject. And
Well, if anybody has any questions for Mr. G or Michael, please call us at 360. Maybe you should give it since you already have it memorized. I have to keep looking at the screen.
360.
693-7544, or my number.
No, no.
Our
that's fine.
number. Well, either number. We'll give ours first, and then we'll give Michael's. Or Mr. G.
693-7544.
Oh my
Good
gosh, you just made me look horrible.
I just read it on.
I've been giving this number out for 4 shows now, and I still don't have it memorized.
I'm gonna get it tattooed right here, so when you look at me.
So I'll look at you? Okay.
And it'll just appear to the audience that we're staring lovingly into each other's eyes.
There we go. Hey, I think we got a problem, one of the guys in there, we got a problem with the mic over here. It's slowly hanging down.
Which
In
mic?
front of Mr. G.
Yeah, the fourth mic.
Oh.
Yeah, that's, we just saw that mic. We're not picking you up very well, I don't think. Jesse?
That's right. I don't have much.
I don't know. Anyone in the booth know if we're getting good pickup on the mic? Okay, it sounds good, Leah said, so.
Because nobody's listening to us.
No, she just said it sounds good.
Okay.
She gave me the thumbs up.
Okay, cool. Michael, you got another song for us?
Oh, I have all kinds of snippets of songs.
Just give us
I'll
some
just do a
snippets.
soundtrack to you guys talking.
Yeah. Need some drinking music. Good job.
Oh, I did woo Mrs. G with this song once.
Should we get her up here?
For just
Maybe I did. She left. You have to start singing at some point. You sing?
No,
No, go ahead.
There are no words to it. You'd have to make them up. It's just.
I need to hire you to play outside the window while I crawl in my Zorro outfit with the rose in my mouth. Yeah.
There you go. Well, does anybody out there have any questions? Go ahead, Carol.
Yes, I think it would be appropriate for you to share your vision of why you want to do this underground show so that the viewing audience understands that.
Oh, okay. Well, the vision for the underground was kind of Adrian's eyes, both vision, and that was just to basically have just kind of a round talk like this and just kind of make it relaxed, kind of like a guy's night out, hanging out, you know, at the bar, just kind of just talking and.
Yeah, just whatever comes up, you know,
Yeah.
whatever topic happens to come up that night, you know. And that offer extends to the audience at home too. If you have a topic you want to discuss, call up with it.
Yeah, and also with the rest of the team here is to allow them to be a part of the same thing. Just all of us just kind of basically having a good time, having a party here. We got pizza here if anybody wants to come down. We got drinks, whatever. But it's mostly just kind of get together, just be relaxed, and you know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done anything like this before, but yeah, that's why I don't perform. It's just gigging is just not relaxing. It's but this is really relaxing. This is pretty fun.
Yeah.
And we're teleprompter free.
yeah.
I think
Unrehearsed.
They can tell.
They can tell.
I did find some open source teleprompting software we can use, so if you want to go on teleprompter, we can.
Yeah.
Hi, audience. How are you today?
Sue, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mike on the guitar here. So you mentioned about teaching your students pitch, correct pitch. I don't know a correct or incorrect pitch. How would you do that?
Well, lots of ways.
Do
Come on,
it.
Sue.
Do it.
Yeah.
Hand it to me. All right.
All right. Did you play it all?
No, I don't.
Is she
Oh,
left-handed
you
or
can
right?
come up here and yes. I'm right-handed.
Oh, flip it over.
Really?
Yeah. Is that right?
I felt right, yep.
That's right.
Okay, okay.
All right. Just put your finger anywhere and play a note, or play one of the strings open.
Hey, Sue, why don't you
What's
just come out
open?
here? Here.
Come up on the chair.
Up on the chair.
Yeah, better lighting out there.
Okay, better lighting.
Have you ever played the guitar before?
No. It's right
Perfect.
there.
Okay, so just pick any string, just, you know, any one
Okay.
you want. Okay, just one at a time. Okay. Pick just one. You
Oh,
you-
do I
you
have
you
to?
find
Is it possible you can kind of sit over there so we get both? you
Oh,
guys
yeah,
in?
yeah.
There you go.
I want to be an interesting student.
So remember your question now.
Okay.
About pitch, right?
Okay.
Hum that note.
Oh,
There, okay, you got it. Now, hum something that's off, that's not that note. And take, so you would be easier to work with because you could tell when you're singing on or off pitch. That's what I meant.
well, I didn't understand when I had correct that was correct. I don't know.
Oh, well, let's do it
You
again.
said it was correct.
Try that one.
Eh, eh.
So you knew it was off, I could see. You know, if you can hear it in your head, sing it. If
And-
you can sing it, you can learn to control any instrument. That's, at least that's my belief.
Really? So that's
Yeah,
pitch.
if you hear it, sing it. Once you can sing it, you can just learn to control any instrument with your hands because you have something in your head to measure what you're doing by, to gauge
And
it.
so when somebody teaches themselves to do the guitar,
Mm-hmm.
to play it, are they going by sound?
Yeah, sound, usually trying to match an artist's song that they like. Rarely do people just kind of get an instrument and play it without having an idea that they want to sound like someone. I used to sell instruments at a place in Portland, and Portland Music Company. And people would come in sometimes with amps and guitars and certain pickups all written down and saying, you know, what would this cost for this package?
Uh-huh.
And then I'd say, wait a minute, this looks familiar. This is like Stevie Ray Vaughan's setup on, you know, like the second album. And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, why do you want this? And they'd say, well, yeah, because I like the sound. I go, because you want to sound like that? And they go, yeah. And I'd say, okay, what are you playing on? And they'd tell me their system. And I'd say, so if Stevie Ray Vaughan comes to your house, is he going to sound like you? And they were like, no. And I go, why not? And they go, because he's going to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Well, yeah, on an acoustic guitar, he'll sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan. So it's not the gear, it's the hands. So if somebody like starts to teach themselves, what usually happens is they plateau and they learn just a style, or they learn just so many chords, and at some point they start writing, it all kind of starts to sound similar because they just plateaued before they really understood music. They learned the instrument and how to control it to get a sound that sounded like a part of, you know, a song. Does that answer your question? Kinda?
Sort of, yeah, but there's a lot. So are there different size guitars?
Yeah.
This seems really big for me.
Really? This
Yeah,
one
it's
would
not
probably
yeah.
Yeah.
That or
Yeah.
I'm holding it wrong. How do I snuggle it? Can you teach me?
There are 3/4 size guitars, and some people hold it, you know, like the Burl Ives holds it kind of straight up. Some people kind of hold it down. The main thing is in the beginning, it's odd. You're going to be wrestling, and at some
Yeah.
point, instead of wrestling with it, it's like you're dancing with it. A shift happens, right? It's just really about making neuropathway
Okay.
development to your
Okay.
hands so they become natural. Once they become natural, and so we have exercises to speed that process up, then you're not encumbered because your hands aren't going where your brain's telling them.
Okay.
Then you can really focus on the sound more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, the way I picked it up and hold it, what are you going to tell me about it?
Okay. Put this finger right
Way
here.
up there?
Right.
I can't see it, so.
Right there.
Yeah.
And strum the high strings.
Which is the height?
Yeah, this is string 1, 2, and 3. Oh, you don't want those ones for that chord. But that's actually a C chord that way. It's a single finger C, but it's a C. You're playing a C.
Well, good
with
for me.
major and D minor. You go, "Ah."
My first lesson. Yeah.
That was your intro to the lesson.
Oh, okay.
What was mine?
Sing us a song.
Yours was E minor.
Oh, no.
You got
I
a way
don't-
better grade than I did.
I
so-
don't sing, nor do I play, but thank you.
Oh, that was great, thank you. Now, sometimes, I specifically have one small student who wants me to grade her, and sometimes she'll get an A sharp. That was the best grade, but then we realized that the G was probably a better grade, so sometimes she gets a G. She came up with it.
I think we have a question. Or
Yes.
A couple of them.
I've already asked one, go ahead.
Okay. So my question for you is it better to learn by ear or by sheet music? Like, what do you think is more effective, or do both work just fine?
That's a great question. The short answer is what ever inspires the student to pick up the instrument is going to be the best in the beginning. And if what you want is to just read a bunch of music, then start reading right away. But if what you want to do is compose, start playing right away. Yeah. It really depends on the individual and what that individual wants. I've had some students that really just want to read, and I have others that that's the one thing they don't, because they think that understanding how to read is going to somehow put them in a box, somehow limit their creativity. So, do you play?
I tried playing a little bit. It's been a while since I've touched a guitar,
Yeah?
to be honest with you. My father owned one. I kind of played the piano for a little while.
Oh, right
after
on.
that.
That's music
Yeah.
theory just laid out in black and white.
I mean, I was involved in quite a bit of music, especially in choir back in high school. I did a lot of choir. So vocally, that's a whole other part of the music world, but it's just equally as important. It's an
Right.
instrument in itself.
Absolutely, and you're looking at notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, a lot of teachers, and I find this on piano. I have students that cross over from piano, had lessons as a child. It's very traditional to play the piano while, from day one, looking at the music and learning the fingerings. And so I've met some phenomenal piano players that say, I don't really play, or they just play really well because of their childhood lessons. But I take the music away and say, let's jam, and they just freeze. They don't know what to do. But if the music's in front of them, they understand timing, they understand key, they can read what's in the score where it says, get louder, crescendo or decrescendo, or, long notes, short notes. Take it away, they're not really sure what key to jam in. So sometimes what I'll do then is have them play a section and then just say, look at all those notes. What chord is that? And once we figure out what chord it is, I say, okay, well, so what key are we in? And if it's a C chord, what's the number? Is that like a number 1 chord in the key of C, or is that a number 5 chord in the key of F? And so we go back and do that. And people that just play, like know their instrument, at some point will want to expand because they hear something. It's either something they saw somebody play or on a recording, or it's in their head. People that learn how to read music kind of have interests and hobbies, and it's just, I found, for the most part, they just sit down and play music, or they don't have an interest in the instrument. If they don't, see a piece of music in front of them, it's not an instrument to play. It's one package, is music and the instrument. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how was it for you? Did somebody give you lessons where you had to read from the very beginning?
It was a mixture of both. Part of being in choir, the actual structure of it was more like, yes, you learn on the sheet music, but also at the same time, you're trying to slowly move off of the sheet music and rely on the sound of you and all the people around you.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting structured way of doing it, but I think it made people who were, especially in choir, you're trying to blend with other quote-unquote instruments.
Yes, you really have to use that ear.
And that's challenging at first, and that's why the sheet music's there, but it's also good to finally, when you get into that mode, you're figuring things out as an overall sound. it's good to step away from the sheet music and actually just concentrate on the sound you're making.
Yeah, it gets you out of your head, and then you're part of an ensemble, right? You're actually part of the music and not
Yeah.
just your part. Yeah, I guess what I would say to answer your question is if you're playing by ear, challenge yourself and start to read. And if you're really used to reading, challenge yourself and take the music away. There. I got out of that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was a good question. Really good question.
Any more questions?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know two people that play by ear. They sit down at the piano and they play the piano, and they've never taken a lesson.
Oh, that's great.
And
That's great.
I guess I just want to know your perspective on maybe how that happens, or, you know.
You know, that's a really good question too. From my experience, because I played a lot of instruments without lessons over the years, it's just trying to find something that I can control, that I can hear, and then just experimenting with intervals. And that's probably what they started with, was just because you have to control the instrument, but it's really because if you're hearing something in your head you want to get out. And yeah, I would ask them. And if they started teaching, they probably would have to, you know, maybe battle with the self-doubt, like, well, I don't really know. I don't know if I could teach you. And, you know, some people teach and some people play, and sometimes they, you know, you find someone who plays who teaches. But if you ask them to teach what they're doing, they would start to look at what they're doing from a totally different perspective, and then they would start to see patterns. But in the beginning, for me, I played without lessons, and it was patterns. And then watching my friends, and then watching, you know, just looking at pictures of people, you know, like watching Eric Clapton or Jimmy Page's hand in a photograph, or, you know, any of those guys that were around, and then trying to get my hand in those positions. And after a while, you find that, especially singer-songwriters, just kind of fall into patterns. You know, like if you want to, back when I was learning, we had, you know, the record, and you put the needle on, and then you put the needle on, and put the needle on, until you finally figured it out. It'd take like 45 minutes to learn one song. It'd take a half an hour to 45 minutes to learn the rest of the album, because the singer-songwriter, there's a kind of a code. Like half of the album's probably going to be in the same key, and the other half's going to have similar chord progressions in a different key, a really closely related key. So, yeah, they're probably pretty comfortable playing a genre, and then if they went to move to something else, they probably wouldn't have the confidence. That's the way I was, anyway. Really comfortable with one genre, and anything else I would just kind of avoid until I started teaching, and then my students had interests in those genres, so I would kind of take it on. But I don't know, does that answer?
Yes.
Cool.
So Michael, can
Yes.
you give out your phone number one more time?
Sure, 360-852-0562.
And your address?
508 Washington Street, Vancouver, 98665.
And what is your hours?
By
That people can
appointment,
walk in.
but I'm there Monday through Saturday. Most of my students are full-time. I offer packages of 4 lessons, and the 5th lesson's for free if you buy 4. Most of my students over the age of about 10 are hour-long individual lessons once a week, and we just set a time that fits in the schedule and it reoccurs. But you know, I did yoga for a long time, so I'm flexible. But thanks for asking that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought about that.
Well, we're getting down to wrapping this up. Did you have any closing comments?
Thank you for having me, and this is fun. This is
Oh, you're
really-
welcome. Thanks for
yeah,
coming.
Yes.
Absolutely. It's also really educational.
Yeah. Michael, you have any closing comments?
No, just I'd like to thank everybody for supporting FVTV, and especially thank you to our studio audience who
Yeah, thank you guys.
and tickets are not expensive, so you know if you want to be part of our studio audience, just show up, and we give free pizza.
Yeah, free pizza. Yeah. So anyways, it sounds like we've got a phone call in here.
All right.
Just came in.
They're really cutting it by the bell. Let's see.
Yep. We might have to do an overtime.
Hello, you're live on the Underground.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, well, I was just thinking of how your show ties together. You've got, the first speaker and then the musician. And it's just interesting because the first speaker was saying, well, these people are getting closer to what they want. And, we're seeing how we're eating this GMO food and the toxic effects it has on people and stuff. And then also in your program, we're just seeing this human brotherhood going on, just exemplified on the show right now. And so, the thing is, we've got this thing happening to the world, and we as decent human beings don't recognize what's happening behind the curtain. And so how are we going to make this connection with normal humanity into a new kind of action that needs to take place to stop this? And what occurred to me is he just said, the musician, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, Michael?
Yes, they're all
Yeah,
Michael.
we got three
They're
Michaels
all
here.
Michael.
He used to
That's a good
practice
guess.
yoga. And I'm thinking, okay, there's this divine intelligence, or whatever you want to call it. There's an intelligence that makes this whole universe function. It's intricate. It's awesome. And how are we as individuals going to tune into that? Because if we do, it's going to override this evil that's trying to manifest amongst humanity. And I can just, what comes to my mind is, of course people want to believe spiritually and have faith and all that wonderful stuff. But how the person themselves, we can do prayer, but there are yogic methods that people can practice that are like you were saying, like meditation, that enable a person to tune into that intelligence. And the way it does it is it frees the mind from all the static that the environment imposes on us, so we become pure consciousness. And there is a documentary that's going to be showing at Hollywood Theater on the 28th and 29th of November, 7 o'clock in the evening. And it's about just that. And I just thought, well, there's the connection for this program. The humanity, how we are going to override because it is a spiritual battle going on in the world right now. And I saw the premiere of this show, and it is awesome. And I suggest
What's the name of the
people
show?
Yeah, what's the name of the show?
The documentary is a true story. So anyway, it's called Awake.
Adrian, ask him.
What was the name of the show, sir?
Awake.
Awake?
Awake. Yeah, it's at the Hollywood Theater, November 28th and 29th.
Okay.
Ask him what his
7
name is.
o'clock
What's the
in the
caller's
evening.
name?
Yeah, what's your name, caller?
Bob.
Bob?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
All right. Thanks for the show. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank
not a
you,
problem.
Bob.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Have a good night, Bob.
You have any comments?
I think we're over.
That's all right.
Time?
We're going to do a little bit of overdrive.
overtime?
Here. Yeah, we'll just do a few minutes of
That's what I like
overdrive.
about public access. We're flexible.
Yeah. So what do
No,
you think of that?
I actually appreciate that. I think, especially as we move forward, we can talk about all the horrible things going on, but I think it's really people bonding with family and friends and connecting that's really making the difference. I think we have some rough times ahead, and that's why I think it's really important to start not just with your families, but also your close friends, as we just kind of bond together and move through this. Long term, I think we've got a wonderful future, but we probably have some things that we're going to have to deal with. And I think we don't want to go through it alone. You're not alone.
Michael, what do you think?
Well, exactly what Mike said. I don't remember who wrote it, but I read it. It said, individually, the future looks pretty bleak. Collectively, it's pretty promising.
Well, I don't mean to bring this up, and if it's too personal, Mr. G, then it's okay if you deny or don't want to say anything. But you had some health problems, and you kind of turned your situation, you're running out. But, you know, it was really interesting that the things that you had to tell me about how you kind of went from one arena to the next arena, and just in your health.
Right.
And how you kind of changed your diet and stuff. And I know a lot of people are having problems with their health, and a lot of it has to do with this GMO stuff. It's really affecting a lot of people's lives.
Right.
And like the interview with Parker Truax, he was bringing up the Ebola. Well, a lot of these symptoms are just because of all the food, the GMOs that we're taking is breaking down our immune system. It's just breaking us down, you know, our bodies. And this Ebola, we need to really get back to, how would you say it? You'd probably say it better.
The terrain inside is how we metabolize, how we assimilate, how we eliminate, right? And yeah, when we have two systems in our body that really maintain harmony or really wreak havoc, and they are in constant contact with the outside world. One is our respiratory and the other is our digestive. So in Chinese medicine, and this is what I learned over my healing, right? Is in Chinese medicine, there's organ group connections, the intestines to the lungs to the skin. Yeah, that's like one unit. So the more we learn about what we're putting in, if we start to clean ourselves up, there's a lot of detoxes out there. We have to stop introducing the toxins as well. And so there's hybridized foods and genetically engineered or modified. Sometimes they actually have a pesticide that's in them. So our body doesn't recognize it, and it goes to store it, and it bubbles up all this stuff until it just stores it away as fat. So then, we start putting on weight and being swollen, yeast belly and all. When we start to lose weight because of the new fad, because we have to look a certain way, but it's really about feeling a certain way, we start to release these toxins, and if we're not educated on that, and the problem over, one of the issues over long term is a lot of the allopathic conventional medical community just didn't spend time studying the nutrition piece, and it's being introduced. There's a lot of wonderful people. When people wake up, they generally just want to do well. It's really, like you said, Michael, relationships, just starting, families, village. Looking out for each other instead of ourselves only really makes us healthy. We look out for other people.
Carol has a question.
I have some notes I downloaded from a website, divinecosmos.com. That's David Wilcock's website. And I was reading over the things I might want to talk about tonight if there was room for it, but I found it very interesting how what he says here in just a few short sentences ties together both of the discussions tonight. Let's see. The people of the planet are finally rising up against a secretive, occult power group that has been enslaving us since the time well before Christ. Can help to co-create that new reality. Your planet ultimately is a very highly structured illusion in which there are widespread numbers of beings like ourselves whose responsibility is to keep the veil of materiality as convincing as possible while offering clues that it is far more holographic than most could ever realize. There are those who want you to feel bad. They promote wars, rumors of wars, plagues, and rumors of plagues, mass shootings, economic chaos, etc. Their goal is to literally keep you in as much a state of fear as possible. It is akin to someone trying to perform a symphony of destruction upon a single violin that contains only one string. More and more you are learning to tune out the cacophony of fear. And like a heroin junkie, the cabal is fighting back by attempting to amp up their responses as much as possible to get another fix faster and faster each time so that no focus is broken and that fear continues to be the dominant nerve jangling note that is played on the global stage.
Good eyes.
That's a
I
little
know, that's
different.
amazing.
So I just want to remind people, when you come into fear, and fear can manifest in many forms, there's a practice called fearless forgiveness. Anything that brings fear to your mind needs forgiveness. Just forgive it, don't justify it, don't try to understand it, but that will help bring you out of being encased in that fear and seeing through the illusion that has nothing to do with what the divine plan really is for your life.
Good job, Carol.
Love and fear can't occupy the same vessel. Fill ourselves with love. That's it.
Exactly. So you got something to play
take-
for us and
to take-
kind of
to take us
keep
out?
the mood going, or unless somebody else has calls in? So beautiful.
I want to say thank you all. Have a good weekend. I
Yeah,
guess.
Mike, I'm glad you came out tonight.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
man.
you.
I'm really glad you invited me.
And
This
can you
was
give
great.
us one more plug before we leave?
Oh, Mr. G School of Guitar, thank you. 508 Washington Street, just right downtown next to Plaid Pantry on Washington, as far as you can go before you get on the freeway.
Yeah.
Come down, give me a call.
And Michael, anything else you have to say before we?
No, I just, next week we'll be here. Is that
Yeah.
the plan?
Oh, by the way, I wanted to bring to people's attention is next week, we're going to try to do at least a 48-hour, all depends on if I can make 72 hours, but we're going to do a telethon. And
Marathon,
A
basically.
marathon, telethon, yeah, marathon. Anyways, so we're going to ask people to call in and just basically kind of help support your local TV, and we want to see what the response is to kind of see if this is the kind of programming that the viewers like. So please participate in it and get involved. I know it's going to be Black Friday, but I'm sure we're going to be starting this after, probably around 3. When's it going to kick off? Do you have an? We're going to have our Friday night show, but
Yeah,
we're going to.
We're still doing this show next Friday, and then I heard like Saturday and Sunday we're gonna try and do a few live broadcasts in between. I have no idea on the times. I guess we'll probably finalize those and mention them next Friday.
Yeah, we'll just check in if
We
I can
should
get
say
out of
our,
bed. What?
email address.
Email address?
Yes.
Yeah,
But,
go ahead.
yes, our email address, you can go info, info, at fvtv11.org. So that's info at fvtv11.org. Send in your comments. Those of you that maybe didn't feel like you were ready to give us a call, but send in your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, because we're actually trying to bring out truth. We're just trying to bring a different content to the public and something that's different from the rest of the channels. And we just would like to hear your feedback in regards to that.
And suggestions as well.
Yeah, suggestions also. Yeah, we're trying to perfect this and make it more professional as we go on, but sometimes it's kind of hard. That's why we need the people out there to call in, participate, and come down and be a part of the team. However, any way you can, whatever you feel like you can contribute is a lot, especially when you're doing everything on volunteer basis.
So it's going Friday and then Saturday?
We're going to go Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Maybe. Or at least Friday, Saturday.
that is a
If
definite-
I can get out of bed by noon, we're going to be doing good.
Well, we already wrote you down for Saturday for 14 hours.
I might be able to do 13 and a half, but
So anyways, well, thank you viewers for watching, and thank you for being part of Underground. And I guess we'll just end it with this. And Michael, can you kind of lead us out?
I'll go on to the next